Hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor. And today, I would like to talk to you about one of my very favorite writers of all time, Robert E. Howard. Robert E. Howard, famously the creator of Conan the Barbarian. He also created a bunch of other great pulp heroes back in the 1920s and 1930s. Most of his stories appeared in Weird Tales, along with his fellow great writers, H.P. Lovecraft, Clark Ashton Smith, and C. Barry Quinn, and a bunch of other guys showed up in Weird Tales magazine, legendary magazine from back in the day. Robert E. Howard was special. He had such an amazing writing style. When Robert E. Howard wrote a story, it is said that as he wrote the story, he would sit at his typewriter and he would actually shout out the words as he was writing because he was that focused, he was that into his story. And I believe it. When you read a Robert E. Howard story, once he gets cooking, you're not just reading the story. You're in the story. You're there. You're experiencing the story. And that is his power. The way he wrote, it just brought you right in to the story and what was going on. I first discovered Robert E. Howard through the Marvel comic books of Conan the Barbarian, like most people my age did. You can still get these comic books. They're being reprinted by Marvel Comics in these gigantic omnibus editions. This is the second volume. I've got 4 volumes so far. I think the 5th is coming out soon. But it reprints all these old issues back there, and it all looks fantastic. Look at that. It's incredible, these books. Definitely recommend these for the comics. But for Robert E. Howard himself, he's been published off and on over the years. Most recently, the best edition that you can get is Del Rey edition, which came out from Ballantine Books. Robert E. Howard, he came out with a few great heroes like Solomon Kane. This is a great collection of Solomon Kane, the Puritan adventurer. King Kull from Atlantis, who became king of Lucia in the ancient world, the prehistoric ancient world. We also have the Pictish king, Bran Mac Morn. Great stories in this one. And of course, Conan the Barbarian. Again, this edition, the Ballantine Books edition, Conan is in 3 volumes in this edition. This is the one to get. Conan has been published for years. The first time he was published after Weird Tales was in the 1950s, I think, by Gnome Press in a series of hardbacks. And they didn't have enough Conan stories, I guess they felt, so they got L. Sprague de Camp to write his own pastiche Conan stories, and eventually Lynn Carter jumped in and wrote some pastiche Conan stories, and they put them in the same volumes as the Robert E. Howard Conan stories. And so when it was eventually printed in paperback in the Lancer series, those are the ones with the great Frazetta covers, you had Robert E. Howard stories mixed up with L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter stories, which was a mess and stupid because those two guys didn't hold a candle to how great Robert E. Howard was. I think L. Sprague de Camp even edited a bunch of non-Conan stories to be Conan stories, which is stupid. And he even edited the Conan stories, which were fine on their own. Pissed off a lot of people, including the legendary Carl Edward Wagner, and he came out in the 70s, I believe. It was the 70s, with his own set of unexpurgated editions of Robert E. Howard's Conan. This was his first volume, The Hour of the Dragon. Came out People of the Black Circle. Look at that great cover. And he ended that set with Red Nails, the great Red Nails, wonderful Conan story. This set didn't include all the Conan stories because of rights. Nowadays, though, you can get all of the Conan stories in this set, completely unexpurgated. You can get also this gigantic hardback of the complete Chronicles of Conan. This is a pretty cool book, big hardcover edition. You can still get that. Robert E. Howard wrote a ton of stuff. He wrote boxing fiction, he wrote westerns, he wrote horror stories, some pretty good ones actually. But his fantasy stuff, his sword and sorcery, that's the stuff he's going to be remembered for. And he, in fact, wrote the first sword and sorcery story that's a real sword and sorcery story, which you could find in Call Exile of Atlantis. I think it came out in 1929, but let me just make sure. Yeah, 1929, The Shadow Kingdom was a Kull story. King Kull. Yeah, great story. We've had some pretty cool editions of Robert E. Howard over the years. I mentioned this one the other day. Almeric, his interplanetary adventure. I had that in when I went down to the Vault of Science Fiction. Here's just a random collection of Conan stories that came out in the late 70s, early 80s, sometime around there. My favorite paperbacks are when Robert E. Howard was first reprinted in hardcover was by Arkham House, who famously rescued Lovecraft from obscurity. They came out with a great book, Skullface Omnibus, or it was Skullface and others, and that's like the Great White Whale. If you're a Robert E. Howard fan, getting a hold of that, very expensive book to find. But it was reprinted in 3 volumes by Panther paperbacks. And look at these covers. There's the first one. Got Valley of the Worm here. And we've got a very skinny warrior here in the 3rd volume. Yeah, Robert E. Howard is great. He eventually made it into a Classics edition. He's here in the Penguin Modern Classics. It's a modern classic, but it's still a classic. I'll take it. For some reason, we don't have this in the United States. This is a UK volume. Probably has something to do with rights. He is a classic, though, so I'm glad he was put in there. If you're really interested in Robert E. Howard, there is a great biography by Mark Finn. There's a 2nd edition to this, an expanded edition, which I looked for this morning, but I can't find because obviously it was stolen by the Phantom of the library. Once again, the Phantom has stalked the dark halls of Von Manor and stolen one of my books. Doubtlessly, I will find it later in a kitchen cabinet, perhaps in the refrigerator, any of the strange places the Phantom likes to stash my books. I will find it. But for now, I can show you this great edition of Blood and Thunder, The Life and Art of Robert E. Howard by Mark Finn. Great book if you're interested in Robert E. Howard. Probably the best biography you will find of Robert E. Howard. Not too many out there, but this is the best. Poor Robert E. Howard. He was a lonely guy living in Cross Plains, a small Texas town. I've been there. I've been to Robert E. Howard's house. I saw his small little room where he used to write his incredibly huge stories. And he wasn't socially isolated. He had friends. He had a girlfriend for a while who wrote a great memoir, by the way, called One Who Walks Alone. They made it into a movie, The Whole Wide World. I got the movie version of the book. Great book. It offers some really interesting perspective on Robert E. Howard. And the movie's not bad either, actually. I want to end with what H.P. Lovecraft wrote about Robert E. Howard after Robert E. Howard passed away. Robert E. Howard committed suicide at the age of 30 on June 11th, 1936. He committed suicide shortly after he was told by the family doctor that his mother was not going to recover from her illness. A lot of people say that Robert E. Howard shot himself because his mother died and he could not face life without his mother. That's not really true. Robert E. Howard was pretty depressed for a long time, and in his writings you see that he kind of flirted with the idea of suicide for quite some time. My belief is that he only lived as long as he did because he cared for his ailing mother. He had a responsibility to his mother. And as long as she lived, he had to be there. I have a feeling that if his mother wasn't around and didn't need him, he would have probably died much earlier. I think he would have taken his own life even younger than he did, which is sad. It's a real tragedy because he was an incredible talent and by all accounts a pretty nice guy. So yeah, when he died, it sort of sent shockwaves of surprise among the little Weird Tales community. H.P. Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard were friends, pen pals, so they never met each other in real life. But when he died, Lovecraft wrote a little piece about his friend. And this is just a paragraph which I think will give you an idea about Robert E. Howard. It is hard to describe precisely what made Robert E. Howard's stories stand out so sharply. But the real secret is that he himself was in every one of them, whether they were ostensibly commercial or not. He was greater than any profit-making policy he could adopt. For even when he outwardly made concessions to mammon-guided editors and commercial critics, he had an internal force and sincerity which broke through the surface and put the imprint of his personality on everything that he wrote. Seldom, if ever, did he set down a lifeless stock character or situation and leave it as such. Before he concluded with it, it always took on some tinge of vitality and reality in spite of popular editorial policy. Always drew something from his own experience and knowledge of life, instead of the sterile herbarium of desiccated pulpish standbys. Not only did he excel in pictures of strife and slaughter, but he was almost alone in his ability to create real emotions of spectral fear and dread suspense. No author, even in the humblest fields, can truly excel unless he takes his work very seriously. And Mr. Howard did just that, even in cases where he consciously thought he did not. That such a genuine artist should perish while hundreds of insincere hacks continue to concoct spurious ghosts and vampires and spaceships and occult detectives is indeed a sorry piece of cosmic irony. He really hit the nail on the head when he was talking about his friend Robert E. Howard. A great writer, and while we all remember Conan, I think not enough people actually go back and read Conan. Conan was more than just a barbarian in a loincloth. Conan was an intelligent man who was opportunistic, who was kind of an anti-hero. But he had his own code, and the great thing about Conan was that he started from nothing, a thief in the streets, to become the king of the greatest empire in his world, the Hyborian Age. And he did it all on his own. Fascinating character. Robert E. Howard was an incredible writer. So do yourself a favor and check out Robert E. Howard. Thank you for spending your time here with me once again. I appreciate it very much. And so I hope to see you next time here at Stately Vaughan Manor. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.